those participants who had logged in earlier and dozed off while we were chatting will come back and start paying attention right now. So, welcome to the second and actually the final EQUIP project webinar, where we will discuss what the implications of the new focus on learning and teaching in the European Standards and Guidelines 2015 will be. Are we expecting the quality assurance really to change as a follow-up to this new document? Before going to the topic itself, a few household maintenance issues. We are recording this webinar, so anything you see on your screen will be recorded, or even anything you hear will be recorded, and we will make the recording available afterwards for all the wide audience to see, because we realize that not everybody can make it at this time. So, for instance, your colleagues will be able to look at this recording afterwards at their leisure time, or if they can't sleep in the evening, for instance. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we hope this to be very interactive. We have 3 speakers. Unfortunately, you can right now only see 2 of them. But 3 speakers who will each present 5 to 7 minutes, and then we have short discussions. And in the end, we have a panel of all the speakers. But we would hope that you as participants will also participate in the discussions. And there are a couple of ways for you to do that. First of all, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can see a chat box. And I'm very happy that people have already started adding comments to the chat box. And besides the greetings to your colleagues, we would hope that during the session, you will use the chat box to add your questions and your comments to the speakers. Even if you make a comment during the presentation, we will pick it up later on in the discussion. So please feel free to challenge the speakers, and let's see what we come up with as a result. Also, during each presentation, you will see a poll, a question in a poll format appearing, and it will be there during that presentation. Once the presentation finishes, we'll close the poll and see what the results are. So please answer to those polls. So I think these are the main issues in terms of how we are going to proceed. As said, we have 3 speakers. We'll start with Fernando Galan from European Student Union, the chairperson, who will talk to us about the student perspective to the new ESG and the focus on learning and teaching. Then we'll go to the teacher's perspective. How do the teachers see this? What is new? What is expected from the teachers? Or what do the teachers expect? And then, and that presentation will be done by Jens Brajensen, who is sitting in Copenhagen, if I'm not mistaken, at the moment. And then last but not least, Isabel Debres from Thomas More University College will talk about their experience from the institutional perspective in looking at how you can respond to the expectations of the ESG. So, but before I go there, just to say that why are we talking about a focus on learning and teaching in the ESG is probably because the quality assurance in higher education has previously been criticized for being too procedural perhaps, and not focusing really on the essence of things, how to assure really the quality of learning and teaching. When the ESG was revised, and now it has been adopted a year ago almost, the idea was to change it so that it makes the link between quality assurance and the teaching mission of the university more apparent, more explicit. The question then is, what does this mean? How will this be implemented? And we hope that our panelists from different perspectives will be able to elaborate from their side how they see this change that has taken place. So I would suggest that without any further ado, we give the floor to students who are really at the center of the ESG. So Fernando, I would ask you to make the first input, and while Fernando is talking, now you will have seen the first question that we ask from you as participants. So please go ahead, Fernando, and participants, please reply to the question we have posed.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tia. I will try also to be brief. I just wanted to highlight the importance of this topic for us, and this is something that ESU has been working for a very long time. So I will try to explain a little bit our perspective and our work and how this actually could be implemented. So I know that it's just after lunch, and some people might be falling asleep, so pay attention for this, take your coffees, and let's be ready. Just very briefly, for those that doesn't know ESU is the umbrella organization of 45 national student unions from 38 different European countries. So it means that in total we represent our 15 million students in Europe, and our main aim is to represent those students at the European level in everything going on there. So this is our brief history. As you can see, we were born in 1982, and next year we will celebrate our 35th anniversary, so we have a long history of working on higher education issues in Europe, but also we have a very strong collaboration with other parts of the world. So very briefly, going back to the topic about QA and the European standards and guidelines, because we need to know very briefly what is the background for the discussions today. Quality assurance is one of the main aspects of the Bologna process, and it started with the Bologna Declaration in 1999. And the ESGs, the idea of the ESGs started in the Berlin Communique in 2003. But back then, we were not only standards and guidelines, there were also procedures that the ministers asked ENQA for. And that's, at the end, how they arrived, together with the rest of the E4, in this case, EURASE, EUA, and ESU, to propose a test with the European standards and guidelines. No procedures this time, and the text was rather a minimum common denominator of what's going on of the 40 countries back then. It was having some problems that then we identified through a project, a joint project that the E4 had together, and there were some unclear relationships between the standards and guidelines. There was very weak language, and also the infrastructure of Bologna was not there back then. There was not a European credit transfer system, the qualification framework was not there, the approach with learning outcomes, the European Quality Assurance Register. So the context was very different. But then in Bucharest, the ministers asked to revise these European standards and guidelines. And what I include there in this slide is like they also asked us to revise the scope. And that was not a recommendation from the E4, but finally also they also asked us to revise the scope and not only the clarity and applicability. So that's how we came to make use of all the different Bologna instruments and tools, because those were already in place in 2012. So we have to make sure that the new ESGs also were reflecting the cycle system, the learning outcomes, the ECTS, the diploma supplement, and the qualification framework. So we moved from the old version, the ESGs 2005, to the ESGs 2015. So are they a game changer? I'm just going to very briefly focus on the scope and the first part, because are the topic of this conference. And one of the important things that was added is like, of course, the focus remains on the learning and teaching of higher education. But while the previous ones were more about the procedures around learning and teaching, this time it's about learning and teaching itself. And it also includes that's the new thing, learning environments and the relevant links with research and innovation. And down the slide, you can see that also the ESGs will apply to all higher education offer in EGEA, regardless of the mode of the study and the place of delivery. So it's not only covering just the bachelor and master's degree, but also any type of online learning or lifelong learning course, also on campus. So it's important that the universities themselves take responsibility about these types of education. And we agreed in 4 principles for the European standards and guidelines, and I would like to highlight a couple of them because it's very important, because we still think that the primary responsibility for the quality provision rests in the institutions themselves, but also this is a responsibility to take care and to respond to the diversity of students, in this case, talking about the student-centered learning, but also including them in the process as a culture and not only as a procedures, and taking into account the different needs and expectations of the students. Of course, also of the stakeholders in society, but I will focus in this case on the ones of the students. So here, I'm just focusing again on the ESG part 1 that has a look to the internal quality assurance processes. I cluster the different ESGs, different standards in 4 columns. This is completely a personal reading, but I think that makes a lot of sense in order to understand better in the part 1. And you can see there are 3 standards that are purely about the learning process, about the design and approval of the programs, the student-centered learning, teaching and assessment, and also what we call the student life cycle, the student admission, progression, recognition, and certification. So those are purely in a way about the learning process. But also there are a couple of standards that talk about the learning environment and are very linked because they are the relevant links with the teaching staff, which otherwise this whole system will not work, but also the learning resources and the student support. And all these 5 standards at the very end are working together. We had a discussion last week in Spain in a peer learning activity, and we were discussing that it's impossible just to define one indicator per each of these standards because some of them will be interrelated. And looking for information about one aspect will give you also information about the other standards. So if you compare the 2005 ESGs with the 2015, if you have been following the developments at the European higher education level, it's more or less like jumping from iPhone 5 to iPhone 6. However, if you were still working with the ESGs 2005 and purely with those, then the adaptation might be a little bit more complicated, and you will notice higher difference, like if you will jump in from iPhone 3 to iPhone 6. So this is an evolution, more or less. I will not call it maybe revolution, but maybe an adaptation, and of course more fast or slow, depending on the point of view. So just going very briefly to the actual topic, I will just like to mention this in this slide. This is a quote from the Louvain communiqué in 2009. So the ministers of the European higher education area came together in this ministerial conference, and already back then came with this test in their communiqué, talking about the student-centered learning as a teaching mission of the higher education. So they explain there more or less what student-centered learning is, and they say that it requires empowering the individual learners, new approaches to teaching and learning, effective support and guidance structures, and a curriculum focused more clearly on the learning and in all 3 cycles. And at the very end, you can see also in green that this should be a priority in the further implementation of the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance. So it's back then in 2009 where the ministers actually put the student-centered learning as a priority for the Bologna process, but also as a focus of the quality assurance in Europe. This slide, normally I use it as with an animation, but it didn't work out that well. But here I just presenting the importance of having a look not to the processes themselves, but to the whole learning and teaching aspect of education. How important it is to have a look to the study program, but also to the recognition, to the different added value of the learning process from the different points where the students are coming from, and reflecting on those internal learning outcomes, but also those other learning outcomes that you can get throughout the study process how the student assessment might enable the students to show their learning, because that's very important. That is not only about the students learning, but also how we can actually help the students to show what they learn, because sometimes we're not using the right tools, and it's very complicated for the students to show that they actually have learned, and how we reflect that also in the diploma at the end of the day. And for that, it's very important, the teaching staff, when we talk about the student-centered learning, is not about getting rid of the teachers. The teachers have a bigger role more than ever as a coach for the students, but also about the learning resources that the higher education institutions offer, and the student support, and how they link the research and teaching mission of the institutions. So this is a small slide that has created some controversy, but maybe I would like to reflect on it. I see as these Russian dolls, the very small one, the core mission of the institutions on teaching and learning, and the core issues that they have to take care of, the study programs, the links with research, and so on, and how the internal QA have to have a look to those and make sure that those are working, and it's inside there. And then the different process is just about taking care that the internal quality assurance is actually working, but doesn't have to jump all the way down to the core. And very briefly, then what the student-centered learning exactly is from the ESGs. So they talk about encouraging the students to take an active role in in creation the learning process. And then the conversation here might be if ESU just put this as a Trojan horse, or actually came from the ministerial conference as an issue that we had to take care of. And the questions that we have been facing is what do we actually mean with student-centered learning, because it could be very different from country to country. And here, what I will say is like, just have a look to the guidelines. The guidelines were actually divided in two sections. The first part talks about the teaching and learning, or the learning and teaching, better said, and what characterize this teaching and learning, about the diversity of the students' needs, being flexible in the learning paths, the different modes of delivery, the variety of pedagogical approaches. But as I said before, student-centered learning is as much about the learning and teaching process as enable the students also to demonstrate what they learn. So we have to have a very good care of the assessment processes, and they have to have different testing and examination methods that actually are able or enable the student to show those learning outcomes. They will be very different depending on the learning outcomes. The criteria have to be published in advance, and we have to have also, for example, consideration of the mitigating circumstances. For example, students with dyslexia, or students with other disabilities, or, for example, religious aspects, and so on and so forth. And I would just like to call your attention upon some projects that ESU had, and they could be very interesting materials for you. And one is called Time for a Student-Centered Learning Toolkit, that was developed together with Education International back in 2010. But also currently we are having a project that is called Peer Assessment for Student-Centered Learning. So how to assess student-centered learning, and I think that this toolkit will be also very relevant for you all. And then finally, also a peer learning activity that we organized with the government of Spain about assessing student-centered learning and assessing the implementation.
For the introduction
which
to
results
the topic.
will be also soon
At this
published on
stage,
the
we're
website.
going to close the poll.
So I hope that
thank all the
now everything makes sense,
for
and I will be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
We were perhaps to start with the poll. We intentionally kept the question very open, asking you to define what we would be expected from the student, and it is interesting to see that we got a lot of different answers. A lot of them deal with the responsibility and the student needing to take an active role in their own learning, and really working together with the teacher, or then having a really autonomous study. Fernando, do you think all the students are ready and willing to do this?
That's a very good question, and that's something that we were discussing over the last week in this peer learning activity. And one of the things that we were mentioning is like the importance, for example, on teachers training, to make sure that the student-centered learning gets not only implemented at the higher education, but also at the different levels, in order to make sure that when the students come to higher education, they are better prepared for this. But nonetheless, I think that they will require, they will have like different types of expectations maybe as well that will have to be met. And one of the proposals, for example, is the same way that we have a teacher training that we could organize at the beginning of the university studies, also some students training.
Yeah, I would probably
in order to enable them and to explain like how they could be better prepared to have autonomous learning, to be better prepared to teamwork, and so on and so forth. So that might be one of the possible options to go for.
You haven't had to take an active role in your learning before, that you've just been at the receiving end. It's difficult to change the mindset at that stage. Another one is that came up in several of the responses was the feedback. That in student-centered learning we expect the students to give feedback. Haven't we been expecting that anyway? And we seem to have difficulties in getting the feedback. Any comments on this, Fernando? We see that, at least when I work with the universities, they say that it's getting more and more difficult to have the students giving feedback.
I think that's a long-standing issue since I started in university. They always complain that we don't fulfill. I think that for this there are different aspects. One is the issue of culture within the university, and what do you do with the feedback, and if the feedback process is transparent, and we saw the results to the students afterwards. If we saw what we do with this feedback, that's one of the first things. But also talking about the student-centered learning, what we are claiming is also we should try to include the students in all the processes. And what it happens, for example, is most of the times the questionnaires are designed by the teachers themselves without even consulting the students. So maybe they are not asking the right questions, not asking them in the right way. So we believe that if we engage also the students in the process of drafting those questionnaires, the results will be better.
Last part of the discussion. Now we go to Jens, who will actually talk about something that was mentioned in some of the responses for the to the first poll, where people mentioned that actually, even if we ask students to do certain things, or then let's say now from Jens's perspective, teachers, we need to create proper conditions for student-centered learning, that it starts with having the conditions that enable or encourage you to engage. So there is another question now on the screen, and we would also like to see Jens's image and hear his voice at this stage. Jens, are you there? Okay. Okay, wonderful. All right, I'll give the floor to you. Please go ahead.
Differences between a standardized approach or teacher-centered approach, where the students tend to more memorize and learn it just for the next exam and not necessarily get a deeper understanding of the subject, while a student-centered learning approach will, as such, support students in this who are striving for a bigger actually studying and not only learning, perhaps. That's another debate. I've just mentioned here one of the examples of some academic research, which is analyzing if student-centered learning is actually or one of the bases for creating a higher quality in higher education. We also made an analysis of our own and presented the outcomes of it in a report that was published in connection to the last ministerial conference in Yerevan in May last year. We had analyzed and had a survey between all our members in 9 different European countries. You can read more about it in the in the book I have made the reference here, but some of the more important recommendations for the how to support teachers in developing that kind of pedagogy and that kind of teaching methods that I've just mentioned is, of course, that we have the support to the teaching function, that special training is necessary, that both institutions and public commits actually to enhance the teaching role of academics, and that's also part of the creating it as a more legitimate career progression route, and not only focus on research, but also give some recognition of teaching in the academic career. And some might find it surprising that actually also evaluation of teaching is mentioned by many of our members in the survey, but it's necessary to stress that they all see it as a way of actually improving the pedagogical activities. So evaluation, which is seen only as a simple control of what happened yesterday without any development perspective, is seen as a burden and not that necessary. But evaluation, which is actually used and is conducted in a way where you can improve your activities, is strongly supported by the respondents of this survey in 9 different countries, European countries, as I've said. The more general recommendations is, of course, that as the communique from the Yerevan Ministerial also says, that a strong public funding is necessary for development and further development of higher education across Europe. We also see a very huge problem in the high numbers and unfortunately growing number of fixed-term contracts, and a more attractive profession is, of course, also a more stable profession with more stable working conditions and working environments. And there are many other, in particular also how to create a better work-life balance and building collegiality between teachers and make them participate and be engaged in collegial governance at many levels is also a very important factor stressed by many members. This also is supported by the UNESCO recommendation from 1997 on the status of higher education teaching personnel, where also UNESCO and the international standards that are set in this recommendation is defining the teaching in higher education as a profession, and lists a number of characteristics of this profession and what is actually meant by a profession and how that profession can be developed. And there are further articles in this recommendation, in particular 31 and 32, on participating in the collegial governance, which I have just mentioned before. The conclusions on the role here is that the importance of connecting teaching and research, and that's of course also a prerequisite to have the highest relevance and quality if you are actually able to teach the latest findings within the subject, because you are actually participating in the research yourself, and that is founding the basis for the highest possible relevance and quality of the best learning outcomes. We also need, again, to meet the more and more different needs of a more diversified student body. Teachers must have the freedom to adjust curriculum, prepare and evaluate classes, and of course, again, we have this need, and that can't be said often enough, that continuous professional development, both subject-wise and pedagogical methods-wise, is important. And I think that we have, it has been mentioned many places and many circumstances, that we actually need to find a way where we can give a higher degree and higher relevance of teaching in the academic career. And it's very important for me to stress that this must happen without just adding another system of reporting and documentation, because that will then be again seen as more a burden than something which is actually improving the attractiveness. And last, my small anecdote. This is from the Mary Clark report that I mentioned earlier, saying that many of our members see themselves as actually being good at meeting the requirements of many reforms, but what are the actual learning and what have the students been studying and learning while they have been through a higher education? And I think that's one of the basic things that we need to consider every time we talk about
thank you,
education,
Jens,
learning and
for
reforms
the presentation.
higher education.
I'm really glad to hear that even
Thank you very much.
In your study, or your colleagues' study, it became clear that the teachers also want and need the feedback or the course evaluations, which we discussed already with Fernando. So there seems to be a consensus that we need those, but how to do them well is the question. One of the things you said that the role of to be part of the role of the teacher is to take part in the continuous pedagogical development. Looking at the results of the poll that we are now going to broadcast, actually it seems that professional development for teaching staff is one of the great challenges. So in the current ESG, we expect the institutions to offer professional development for teaching staff. Any comments on this? Is the challenge at the side of the institutions in offering this, or could it be that it's at the side of the teachers as well to take part in the continuous development of their teaching skills?
Oh, I think it's both. And I think it's also reflecting the complication that we have when teaching is not giving that kind of priority and the same priority, or not the same, but a more equal balance with the research when we're talking about the academic career. Because to say it bluntly, why would you spend some time on things that are not valued in the career system and by the institution when they focus most on your research, and that's the research engagement you have is what is being assessed career-wise, job promotion-wise, and things like that. So if we give a more prominent place, I'm not talking about a balance or something, but just to start doing something which can develop also the teaching component in the academic career, I think we'll see also a development of more interest in actually improving and participating also in professional development. So I think it's both.
Even
both
if
and not
there was
either
kind of
or,
more incentives and the balance would be different, do you think that would solve the issue that, for instance, in many cases in the institutions, it seems that when you offer pedagogical courses, you are preaching to the converted people. And for instance, when we've done our trend studies, we've seen that it doesn't seem to necessarily lead to success stories if you make your pedagogical courses, those that you offer, compulsory to the teachers.
Mm-hmm. But we have it here in Denmark in our collective agreement on university teachers that all new appointed university teachers must go through a pedagogical training, and so it's compulsory when you start a university teacher career here for postdocs and other in the beginning of your career. So and I think that we actually have the experience that that many are quite happy about that and see it and have a more confidence in themselves and their engagement with the students in the classrooms, that they are actually having some pedagogical tools in their toolbox to be able to meet.
But perhaps the trick there is
so
that
it's not seen
it's for those who come
necessarily
to the
as
profession,
a burden,
so they know it
also
from the beginning
helpful tool.
that, okay, if this is the career I want, I need to do this. Yeah. Okay. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But also, of course, being offered on a more you know,
okay.
also
a very
people who
concrete
have
question
some years
there is
in the
from the
profession
chat
can
box.
actually
How
participate.
long is
It's
this
not
training?
exclusive for young. Oh, it depends. I think the most is that you have it in a combination between observations of what you're actually doing in a classroom while you're teaching and some theoretical training in different. So I think the time table around it is 1 semester, but you know, it's there are something where you observe and supervision and reflection and feedback on what is happening in the classroom, and some more theoretical participation in courses and classes yourself on pedagogical methods. So it's not a full-time study, but something which is running throughout 1 semester, where you also get the feedback and evaluation of your performance in the classroom.
Okay, thank you, Jens. We have to move on. We'll get back to you in a short while, but we also need to give the floor to the institutional voice and how does the institution look at these things. Isabel, if we could have you back among us with also hopefully with an image and a voice. Isabel.
Yes, hello.
I can't
yes,
see.
I'll start my
hello.
webcam.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Of course, yes.
Yes, and then okay.
Yes, of course today
And we
there
can
are
also
problems
see
with the webcam. Yeah, I hope
yes,
the webcam will
it seems
hold,
to be
because of course today there are problems with my webcam. Okay.
Yes. All right, we take
hello, good
the
afternoon.
away and I'll give the floor to you.
Yes. Okay. I am Isabelle Depree, and I'm a member of the Educational Support Service of Thomas More University College in Belgium, and I'm going to reflect on the institution's responsibility in supporting teaching staff in order to implement and realize student-centered learning, teaching and assessment. During my presentation, I will confirm different aspects mentioned by Fernando and Jens. I hope you will see the connection between what they said and what I'll present. I focus on 3 standards of the ESG for internal quality assurance, part 1. The way Thomas More complies to them, I will focus on standards 1.1 and 1.3 because they are essential in the way that we comply to standard 1.5, how we assure ourselves of the competence of our teachers. When I start with standard 1, essentially here is to express that we express a clear policy for quality assurance, and that we do not focus on big and long quality procedures, but on a strategy we follow to assure the quality. The main strategy is co-creation in and of education. We are convinced that by co-creating with staff, both teaching staff and educational support staff, students and also representatives of the professional field and all the phases of educational development and program development, that we can assure the quality of our study programs. And also by focusing on evidence-based education, we try to assure the quality of our teaching. We use outcomes of educational design research internal information based on our business intelligence. That's also part of the ESG standards. Also the outcomes of successful practices by our own teaching staff, and of course by good examples of other teachers from other institutions. As educational support service, we try to support our teaching staff in the co-creation process because it's not so evident, it's not so easy to integrate the meaning, the ideas of students and the professional field. It's new to some of our teaching staff, and so we try to help them to do that. It's also something that we check through our internal educational audit, so it's important that they follow also that strategy in order to develop their programs and their education. Important also, and I think it's the same as explaining a clear strategy on quality assurance. It's also that we have clearly defined as an institution what student-centered learning, teaching and assessment means. For Thomas More, student-centered learning, teaching and assessment means that students are partner in education, that we challenge students from the beginning and through experience in the programs, that we have clearly defined learning outcomes, but that we also have a strong body of knowledge and skills defined, and also we focus on integrating the 21st century skills in our programs. It's important to show initiative for students, to be flexible in a profession. So we try also to integrate that in our programs. Students are responsible for their own study program. They make their own choices, the trajectory that they follow, and so on. We focus on designing blended learning environments that also enhances those aspects, and we try to include aspects of design for all, because the student body is very diverse, and we try to support our teachers in doing that. Also, we focus strongly on the role of feedback in the learning environment, feedback as an important aspect of the learning environment. Next to all those learning environments aspects, we try also to create a community at our campuses, because learning happens mostly and deeply when students feel at home, but also when students and staff feel at home. So living and learning, it's a mix for us. We focus on a lot of things, and we try to connect a lot of things we do to that vision, because the clear vision also influences and steer the way teachers and students operate in the blended learning environment and the educational community. So by expressing what we mean by student-centered learning, teaching and assessment, we hope also that it enhances teachers and students to operate conformly. These are important aspects in the way how we support our teaching staff. We support them on different levels, but we focus on learning and developing pedagogical skills and competences through innovations and experiments, both small and big, rather than a big battery of separate training sessions, because teachers don't have a lot of time to follow the single separate training sessions, and we try to integrate the training into innovations and experiments. Also small innovations and experiments, because we think they are a catalyst for bigger innovations. We try always to bring teaching staff and educational support staff, educational innovators together, so that staff doesn't have to do it on themselves, but that they are supported by an educational innovator. It's important also to connect those experiments and innovations with pedagogical design principles, but also with our vision on student-centered learning, teaching and assessment, so that what we do has a direct link with our vision and the way we see student-centered learning, teaching and assessment. We try to incorporate the development of pedagogical competences of the staff into the innovation process. We focus on innovations in teaching methods and the use of new technologies. So by focusing on successful change in relation to their competences. So we do not want to change too much if the competences of the teaching staff are not allowing that. We try to make a fix. We try to let teaching staff do things that are a bit out of their comfort zone, but that will be successful. Because experiencing success, we see that as a key factor, especially in small innovations and experiments, because they facilitate also the success of bigger innovation projects. Within those innovation projects, we support our teaching staff in a similar way. We install innovation teams, so it's more a team-based process. Also there, we try to connect with our vision on student-centered learning and teaching, and we integrate the development of pedagogical competences of the members into the innovation process. We do not make big plans, I said, but we try to use a fast cycle of design, act, reflect, adjust, redesign, act, reflect, so that through planning and execution, there is not a big difference between planning and execution. We try to bring them together, and you can compare it in a way with minimum valuable products. In teaching, it's possible to do that and to refine them throughout the implementation process. Of course, in assessment, we have to go a little bit more than minimum valuable, but we try to let teaching staff have successes with the innovations they do. And that's mainly the focus that we do. We try to act fast, do things fast, of course, based on evidence, on our vision, on student-centered learning and teaching, and we try to focus on small successes and on what to do to achieve the expected outcomes of the innovations. So by doing, we try to train our staff and to innovate our education.
Yes, thank you, Isabel.
At the same time.
I think
your
institutional approach is
an
interesting one. And quite innovative. I see that in the poll that we're now closing, basically 90% of the respondents mentioned that the new focus or the way the new ESG is formulated, it will require at least some changes in their institutional processes. At least to some extent, so they've had to go through an reflection and adjust something. If you look back at the past year or two when you've looked at the new ESG, did you feel that, oh, now we need to do something else? Oh, we've lost you, unfortunately. So I hope we can get Isabel back. The image is frozen at least. So Isabel, if you can reactivate your connection. No, still no luck. So I think if that's the case, until we have Isabel back, let's take our other panelists on the screen. So Jens and Fernando, if you can activate your cameras and your microphones.
Yes.
Yes.
Isabel?
I hope it will send.
Yes. Okay. So if you look at when you looked at the new ESG, did you in your institution have to make changes because of it? No.
The answer is maybe.
Unfortunately, things happen every. Sorry?
the answer is maybe, and that's final.
Yes. Okay. But all right, I am conscious of the fact that we basically used the time, the 1 hour we promised to the participants that we will cover at least the basic stuff, and I think we've covered those. We will go a few minutes of overtime in addressing a few things that have come up in the very active discussion that the participants have had during the presentations. First of all, student portfolio is quite often seen as part of student-centered learning approach. Fernando, have you had to do one yourself in your studies? Any experiences?
I don't think that actually my experience is the best example for a student portfolio or for a student-centered learning. I'm myself a medical student. I got exams of some very practical subjects on multiple option exams, so I don't think that that's the way, for example, to examine some of the competencies that you might be required as a future doctor. So no, personal experience, no, but I think that also the student portfolio is a good example, but we have to take care also of the different needs again here. It's a very good example about how students can build upon their curricula and take responsibility on their education. But at the same time, what do we do with the different needs with the students that learn differently, that maybe this example is not the one that fits them the best in order to keep learning? Or, for example, those who have some sort of learning disability or other types of disability. It's a very great tool, but again, if we are talking about student-centered learning, we cannot just one size fits all.
Yeah. Isabel, do we have your voice?
I have my voice, yeah.
No, still no. Oh, all right.
Yes,
our student portfolio is being used in Thomas More.
But I think we are still struggling with the best way to use them. Now we try to use them more with the 21st century skills by focusing on those kind of skills rather than on professional skills, more specific professional skills. Because it's always a difficulty to show process and outcome of the students. How the assessment of the portfolio is a very difficult topic for our teaching staff.
Learning outcomes have come up in quite a few comments that the basis of student-centered learning is our learning outcomes, defining them and then assessing them. Are they, Jens, what's the view? Are they being used properly in terms of their potential of promoting student-centered learning?
Well, of course, there's a risk that you get too focused on predefined, and I see this very important comment that they in many times is seen as a roof rather than a basis, and I think that's really dangerous if you see it as a very narrow and very focused top level of what you actually should achieve as a student. I would very much prefer that they are seen as the basis and the minimum, and that you can actually do more on that minimum basis. And I have seen some unfortunate examples that, for example, you focus very much on a very narrow part of the labor market, saying that this learning outcome is specifically directed into a very narrow part of the labor market, disregarding that an academic education should, of course, incorporate competences to a very broad part of the labor market. Take my own example as a geographer. It was never written that I could be a trade union bureaucrat, but that developed afterward. And people say often that I don't use my education, and on the contrary, I use it every day, but I don't use, of course, the particular geography part of it, but I use the academic and broad understanding parts of the university degree that I obtained. So I think it's important to say that higher education should not only be very focused on a very narrow and very limited learning outcome, but should actually be the broad basis also for a job afterwards.
Any comments, Fernando? If the basis are the expected learning outcomes, and at the same time, one of the key issues for in student-centered learning is that the students would be part of the design of the curriculum. Can these both be done?
I think that we have to find the right balance, as Jen said. I mean, not all the learning outcomes will be actually able to be designed or completely specified always in advance. However, we have to have the main learning outcomes there in order to make sure that taking into consideration where we want to arrive at those learning outcomes and the group of students and the different needs, we actually put in place the better teaching and learning methods in order to help them to get there and to so that they go there. But at the same time, some students might go further, might acquire other learning outcomes that they were not intended as such. And we need also tools to examine those and to reflect those in their diplomas. Because as Jen said, most likely also through their engagement in the university and not only through the subjects, they will acquire other types of learning outcomes that will be appreciated by the society and the labor market in the future and could be very useful for their development.
We have a question of how to encourage the students to take more active role in providing feedback and evaluating teachers. Isabel, do you have any tips? Because you say that you, from the beginning, when the student comes in, they know that they are expected to be active. But do you have some other tricks so to promote their participation? Very concrete activities, for instance.
We try to integrate feedback in all parts, feedback on the teaching process we have the traditional questionnaires, but we try to focus also feedback that students learn to give feedback and get feedback from the teachers on their learning process and on the way the teaching process is organized. We try to use feedback as a tool of the co-creation process that is important for us. So it's on the way teaching is provided, assessment is provided at the end of the process, but also during the process. And we are still at the beginning of that process, so we try to do it as much as possible and try to learn how it is done the best way. But we don't have the big solution yet to do it the best way. We are still trying out some different aspects.
Jens.
Yes, I just want to add that I think it's very important that we are not only talking about some of these traditional student satisfaction surveys, and which are in many cases more seen like a popularity measurement rather than a tool for improving what is happening in the classroom. So I think we need a more integrated culture in saying, well, how can we do this on a more integrated basis and not only distributing a survey at the end of each class. So I think that it's also building up another culture and not only relying on some surveys at the end of it.
The magic word culture. I think there was discussion during the session already about the quality culture. We could keep getting to that. Fernando, you wanted to
actually, I think that aspect is key of a student-centered learning, and also on the teaching and staff aspect. Like how actually the teacher can identify, for example, if the students are not learning during the year, and can actually make sure that he adapts the learning methods for that group of students. Because if you have to wait all the academic year at the very end to get a survey to tell you that what you did was not working, then you lost a whole generation of students. So we need to have procedures, but at the same time we have to have a culture and find the balance in order to make sure that this is actually working and we are not going either to a very unregulated system or completely not structured, or to a completely bureaucratic system which is actually not functional.
I think it's interesting. Every time we talk about quality assurance, we do end up talking about the culture, but that does impact the commitment and ownership and so on, which we always do say that is the basis of it. And I realized that we've gotten a little bit far away from the key issue of learning process. I do want to go back to one slide that Fernando had. You had one slide where you used the part 1 standards. You had put them in the different groups. There was one at the one end, which was really these standards deal with learning process. And then at the other end, these standards deal with the internal quality assurance system. I would want to contest that a little bit, because I think every standard should deal with the internal quality assurance system, shouldn't it? Isn't it a bit dangerous if we separate them again in our understanding, Fernando?
Yes, but I think that they have different focus on that. That was my aspect. Like, some of them talk more about how the quality assurance system procedure itself works, like what is the ongoing monitoring and review, how you work with the cyclical, also external quality assurance, and the public information. Those standards are very keen, that have to reflect upon the rest of the standards. But at the same time, the ones that actually look upon the content-wise are those that are coming from 1.2 to 1.6. The rest are very important of the management of the quality assurance system, but what the actual internal quality assurance system does are from 1.2 to 1.6. And that relation between the standard, I think, is super interesting. And I would like to refer again to the discussion we had in this PLA, where we are trying to identify indicators of ways to measure student-centered learning. And we realize that it's very difficult to just come up with indicators per standard, but maybe you can come up with a set of information that you might need for the whole internal quality assurance system that might give you pieces of information for several standards and not just specifically one-to-one type of relationship.
Okay, well explained. Jens and Isabel, one last question, basically a little bit for both of you. There was at one point in the chat a question of where do we draw the lines between the roles of teachers, students, and the institutions? For instance, in the ESG, there was a decision made that the part 1 of the ESG talks about the institution should do this and institutions should do that. It doesn't say who within the institution. Do you, for instance, Jens, from the teacher perspective, have a view on this? Can we draw a clear line where the institutional responsibility starts and the teacher's responsibility stops?
Well, if we talk about what I mentioned in the presentation, that and keeps to the importance of engaging both teachers and students in collegial governance systems, then of course you have you can't make that distinction so very clear, because then everyone is engaged in actually developing the institution and developing the institutional goals and developing the pedagogical methods in a more collegial way than only saying that something is happening in the rector's office and the rest of it is happening in the individual classrooms, in the interaction between the teachers and the students, where the quality, of course, is created at the end of the day. So I think it's perhaps, if we think about it as more a collegial governance and a collegial process for the development for all active partners, and we actually are supporting the same and striving for the same goals, then it's perhaps more interesting to say, well, how can we actually make a mutual process to support our way to this goal, and have a focus on saying, well, who is supporting it, and then of course having the focus that the real quality is created in the individual classrooms, whatever they are, on a campus or on the internet or wherever is the education takes place.
I like to add something. I think
Isabel, would you want
there
to
is
add?
not a very big distinction between the responsibility of the institution and of the teaching staff. I think it's setting the right environment for the institution and to do it together with the teaching staff. That's why we try to connect in our innovation process and in the teaching process educational support staff and teaching staff. It's doing it together and especially setting the climate to realize and implement student-centered learning and teaching. And for me, it's something you do together, and not something as an institution you define and say that's the way it has to be, and then just try and do it. But let's do it together, and if possible together with students, so that the outcome is the best outcome you can get.
I see the student representative is
Yeah,
nodding.
indeed.
So were these good words to finish our session? Yes, I think we have gone over time a little bit. I see we have a lot of comments in the chat box that we didn't manage to comment. But I think in many of the cases, the participants probably answered each other. And I think there were quite a few cases, either institutional or system level kind of case studies, or let's say examples of which are the challenges and how to overcome them as well. So we, for instance, learned that Denmark is not the only country where teachers more or less systematically get or are expected to take part in the continuous development. This discussion should not be considered as the end of the discussion. I think this is probably the beginning, and as we get more and more experiences, we'll have more inputs. And for instance, the Equip project will continue. We will have a little survey to you after this session, to our participants, where you can also give us more data. And we will use it in the next phases of the project, where we are also looking into developing some further guidelines for the institutions and preparing also the final report. Unfortunately, the physical events and workshops we are organizing this spring are already fully booked. At this stage, I would like to thank Fernando, Jens, and Isabel for very good inputs and good discussions, and bearing with me trying to challenge a little bit the roles of different actors. But I think what Isabel said is correct, that if we really want to make it provide good student experience and high quality higher education, we do need to work together. That's the issue. Then, depending on your context, the exact distribution of roles might vary from one institution to another. So thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the participants for your active contribution, and we look forward to seeing you in some other events.
And thank you for moderating, Tia.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jens. Yeah, thank you, Isabel. I hope next time we do this, we'll have a better luck with the webcam as well. But it was nice that we could have your voice at least, yeah, in the discussion. So, goodbye and a good afternoon for everyone.
Bye.